Hey guys, this is Vince at Practical Performance again. This is a short video with installation tips for the installation of the VinceSkinz. And again, I have what I call my workbench upside down, so I'm gonna just spin the camera over and hopefully this is gonna make more sense for you. I'm gonna show you a couple of tips here, and I'm gonna start with the left rear skin. This again is where the typical, sorry, there we go. This is where the typical, well actually, let's do this. This is where the typical hairline crack would be. And it probably goes sort of something like that, that's average. And it could be a lot worse. To install the VinceSkinz, you really need to have the crack completely within the boundaries of the VinceSkin. That, you know, that's what I can guarantee works. Okay, so the VinceSkin, the way you want to install this, first of all, the underside needs to be really clean. This is my workbench, it's been outside, it has the rust and stuff, just please ignore that. But you want to remove the rear axle, you want to remove the gas tank, which is over here, and you want to remove all the dirt and grime. That's kind of the starting point. Then what you do is you fit the VinceSkin. What you want to do is, see, this is a little springy here. What I've done is I've done the very best I can to make this skin fit as tightly as it can. Okay, but there could be some tweaking you need to do, and what you need to do is make sure that you have the tightest fit possible here. Okay, so as you can see, when I press this, it fits really nicely. So what you want to do is press it in place. You want to use something like a wheel bolt like this and a large washer, or maybe even something like this. So you put that on top. You have your wheel bolt. You sort of tighten this a little bit, hand tight, and then you press it into place. And then you tighten this. You may want to use a small sledgehammer like this, or a plastic hammer, something like this, sort of to first get it into place. If there's any forming needed, let's say, oh yeah, over here. So what I've done is I made this sort of indentation. You know, because I've been sort of banging on this, I think what I've done, well, actually this probably doesn't make much sense. I'm taking this on and off, but never mind. I'll take it off again just to explain this. When I create these VinceSkinz, I'm sort of, you know, using this as a template, and I'm hammering here to get this down. I cut it open. The template is cut. I hit it down, and I think that this is probably indented a little bit too much. Okay, what I've done is I haven't, you know, made it all the way down, which probably means that, imagine that I tighten this again, okay, that you may need to sort of hammer this a little bit, tap it. I find using a heavy hammer or sledgehammer like this and sort of tapping does the work the best, rather than a light hammer and sort of hammering harder. Also, what I've done is I've done my very best to have this fit over here. So there's a form there right here. And as you can see, the rivet holes are sort of spread out the boundary, but there's also a number of holes that are strategically placed where there's double, you know, you can see the spot weld there that indicates that there's another layer underneath, or above in this case, the rear axle carrier panel skin. Okay, so there's a reason they are where they are. Okay, that's some basic tips. So what you do is you clean it up, you place it the best you can, you sort of hammer it to fit, and then you use a marker, okay, and you scribe around the boundary. And then what you also do when this is where it should be, use the 3.25 millimeter drill bit that's supplied in the tooling kit, and you use your power drill and you drill through all these holes. So you have a hole pattern in the rear axle carrier skin, panel skin. Remove it, and now you need to remove the paint. And I typically use wheels like this. These work really well. They remove the paint and the seam sealer, as you can see there, but they're not really abrasive on the sheet metal itself. So you have this all, you know, the inside of the boundary and a little bit outside, obviously, metal, bare metal. And then what I do is, now you want a rough surface, sort of similar to that. Here's where I've been grinding inside the weld. See, I've added a little triangular piece there, sorry, and welded and sort of ground that down. And I left that rough surface so you have sort of a reference. The way you get that rough surface on both the VinceSkinz and on the car panel is you use a grinding disc on your angle grinder, but rather than sort of grind like that, you put it perpendicular and you sort of let it bounce around. I've shown this in the installation video for the VinceSpark kit as well. Now you get that rough surface on both, you know, the skin again and there. Now what you do is you take your epoxy, and you sort of, you know, with the application gun, you sort of spread it out as best you can. And actually I forgot to bring the brush. So I have a paintbrush, and then I cut the, so the paintbrush has, you know, the actual brush itself. That makes it pretty soft. What I do is cut it shorter, so you get a stubby paintbrush. And then you sort of make sure that you have a thin layer on both surfaces. Place your skin, clamp it down, add the rivets, and then you start clamping the rivets from the center and then move out. So you're sort of pushing the excess epoxy out to the boundary, and then you use the brush to sort of get a tight, sort of a watertight boundary, if you will. That's kind of the basic way of doing this. Now, there's another small thing, a tip here. So if you have a E46 that's built post February 2000, you have the sort of the more modern, the updated version of the inside here, the mount. And then you will have these, I'm not sure that shows you, yeah, it does. You will have this indentation here. Inside there, there's sort of a wing to the mount that's spot welded. I want to fill this gap, so therefore you get these pieces. These are used for the post 2000 builds. I think all coupes actually. And that fits pretty snug in there. So what you will, what you will have is that once you drilled through that hole there, there will be a hole somewhere sort of centered here. You want to make sure that you drill a hole in this so it fits in here, and there's a hole through, obviously. So when you apply the epoxy, you then sort of apply this little piece here, and then you apply the skin, and you run the rivet through it all, obviously, and clamp it in together. So that way you have this sort of touching this, and you tie it into that wing inside of, you know, inside of here with the mount. So that's the left rear, okay? It has this piece. The right rear is slightly different. These studs, by the way, there are studs, let's see, here and there on your car. This is for sort of a breather hose for the gas tank, and this is for the actual filler necks that comes sort of from here all the way over and into the tank over here. You cut these off, this one and that one. I drilled a hole there. That was just for, you know, testing. You want a flat surface there. That makes it so much easier to place this. Well, actually you couldn't, but if I didn't do it this way, you would have to have a hole here, and it would be kind of difficult to grind around it, and there would be a possibility of getting, you know, moist in here and stuff like that. So I decided to just cut it clean, get, you know, prepare this surface the same way. And now when you put the skin on, you have these studs back again. So you can add those, you know, plastic nuts. Okay, so the difference, so on this side, we have this perfectly rectangular piece. On this side, there's a different, you know, shape. And that's because now we're filling, this indentation here. And you have this, you know, corner there. So this is supposed to go like that. And again, you will have a hole here that goes through the skin into the wing that's for the mount. And now you want to create a hole in this that sort of lines up. And then once you have everything in place, you run, here we go, you run the rivet through the VinceSkin, through this baser, and then into the mount. And again, you clamp it down, you start, you know, put all the rivets in before you'll actually, you probably want to sort of get all the rivets in, have this hand tight first, and then you tighten it down. And then you start, you know, clamping the rivets from the center out. Okay, so that's the two rear ones. The front mounts, you know, same principle. There's not much to say about the left front, other than what you want to make sure, actually, let me come around this way. You want to make sure you get this area as tight as you can. Sort of, you see there are a couple of holes there. And you want this to touch as good as you can. And then, you know, don't worry too much about centering this large hole. Same thing applies here. You can see that I've actually made this a little bit up round. Don't worry too much about that. The important part is getting the skin to fit really well on the VinceSkin, on the skin of the rear axle carrier panel. Should you have to make that hole larger, you need to do that. They should be okay though. Now, again, get this surface, sort of clamp that down, and then you worry about the back side, or actually the front side in this case of the car. This comes down all the way around, which is unique for the VinceSkinz, by the way, and you sort of clamp this together. It's easiest to sort of push this all the way back, and if this isn't touching for some reason over there, now you use your hammer. You can also use something like that, sort of, you know, just hold it, punch it in. You want to close it as close and tight fit as you can, and now finally use the rivets to sort of clamp it all together. Same thing applies here. You start with the rivets, you put all the rivets in with this hand tight. Now then, once you have the rivets in, you clamp this down, you know, tighten it with a wrench of some sort, and the large washer and the wheel bolt, just as before, with all the rivets in there. Once that's done, you sort of tap this in as tight as you can get it, and now you start tightening the rivets from the center and move out. Same thing over here, only this is a bit more complex. This part is the same as that, but because of the filler neck, the gas filler neck coming down this way, you know, this is a more complex shape. This is a very time-consuming skin to make. You know, it's curved pretty much all over the place. It's crazy. The only flat surface is this surface up here. And it comes again around this way. The reason we have this extra lip here is that, if I remove that, the typical crack, this is the right front mount, the typical crack, actually it probably makes more sense to view it from here as if you were under the car. The typical crack sort of starts there, it comes down this way, and it sort of moves around like that, and it can actually pretty often come around this way. Sometimes it goes all the way through this outer panel into this panel and comes through there as well. So therefore, this covers all the way down and around. If you don't have the crack move past this panel, you can cut this lip here sort of straight over, follow this panel here, okay? If it does move past, what you want to do is get this all tightened down, sort of hammer this down a little bit. It will be a step there, as you can see. And now drill 2 more holes so you get into this panel here. But that's sort of optional. What I typically do is before I deliver these, I make a dotted line here. So you know, just write optional or something. So this skin, again, the important part is getting, this surface to fit as good as you can. So you want to place it, so you don't put it in like that. You place it from the underside and upwards. And then you get something like, you know, I actually prefer something like this. It's larger. And again, the wheel bolt. Sorry. So you hand tighten this. It's difficult to do this with one hand. Well, actually, let's do this. It's easier when I'm holding the camera. Okay. See, hand tighten this. Actually, there's another thing I probably need to show here. I've made this shape here as tight as I can to fit over here. There's a small gap there. I have no idea how much these differ between the different cards, so you may have to grind some off here. You need to have a small gap so it doesn't, you know, push too hard there and jam. Okay, so now I hand tighten this. Now you want to push this in. You want to make sure you get as tight fit as you can before even clamping it with the rivets. Once you have that done, now you tighten it with your wrench. Maybe you tap it just a little bit more with your sledgehammer. If there's, you know, something, you know, if you don't get this to fit, you know, how should I put it? You may want to adjust this a little bit by either tapping here, removing the skin, using a pair of pliers. Maybe you want to bend it a little bit, but what you're looking for is the tightest fit you can get. That's the whole sort of idea, the principle of this. You want a tight fit, and then again, you do the same procedure. You scribe around, you remove the paint, you roughen the surface with the grinding disc. Oh, actually, one other thing. Once all that is done, and you want to do the roughening as late as possible, just before you're doing the gluing, so you don't get any corrosion sort of on that surface. Use brake cleaner and just clean the surface and let it dry, you know, perfectly dry, maybe a heat gun or something to get everything off. Then apply the epoxy, brush it out, place the skin, clamp it down. Use the steel rivets, they clamp really good. So if there's small gaps like this, it's gonna clamp it in. It's, you know, they clamp really hard. So, and you will see as you tighten, well, clamp the rivets from the center out, you're gonna be pushing epoxy out of this gap here. Again, use your brush, you know, make sure you have a tight seal around. And, you know, that's pretty much it. What you want is 4 wheel bolts, so you can have 1 wheel bolt on each. You want 4 large washers or something like that to spread and sort of get a really good tight, you know, pressing fit there. And then you want it to cure, obviously, for, I don't know, maybe 24 hours. That's the, really, honestly, that's the only downside I can see with the epoxy rivet. You know, you don't get any of the heat related stuff. You don't get, you know, with well, actually, let me get to the downside. The downside is the curing time. So if you have run a shop, you're tight for time. Welding is instant, obviously. But if you're a do-it-yourselfer, or you have some area to, you know, just leave the car to cure, this is so much better. A typical plate kit will have a plate that's sort of just folded up, and then it's open here, and it's open. You have a large opening here, right where the stress concentration is. And now when you're welding it in place, you're welding around here, you're adding tons of heat here. You're creating a heat affected zone, which is brittle. You know, you're changing the metallurgical properties of the steel. So you're making it essentially weaker where it needs to be as strong as possible. With this method, you're doing nothing of that. You're just sort of stop drilling your cracks. You're adding some strength on top of it. You're covering the cracks. It's sort of it's a laminated, layered approach. You have steel, you have epoxy, and you got another steel. It's sort of like plywood, really. So you get not just double strength here, you get more than that. And more importantly, there's not a huge step from, let's say, 2 millimeter. This is a 1 millimeter sheet metal thing, by the way. That's very intentional. I couldn't make it thicker, but that's just, you know, worse. Because otherwise you get a really stiff and really like a 2 millimeter thick piece here. And then you have a step down to less than 1 millimeter over here. Now we're going from, well, actually it would be 1 plus 2, which is 3. And then you're going to less than 1. Obviously, there's going to be a huge stress concentration. And if it would be welded, you're adding the heat affected zone here, which makes the right where you have the stress concentration, you also weaken the metal. So this method completely avoids all that. The downside is there's curing time. If that's not an issue for you, which it is not for me, this is just so much better. You get a tight, that you know, that all the gaps are filled with epoxy. There's no risk that you get the moisture in there and all that stuff. This was supposed to be installation tips. I'm talking about the benefits now. So actually, let me back out of that. This side as well, you may need to tap this down. You want this gap to be sort of closed as much as possible. And then the sort of last part, you're clamping with the privet. I think that pretty much covered it. I said this would be short. This is now more than 20 minutes. Time flies. Okay, guys, thank you.